Hi,
Elizabeth,
Mike.
thanks so much for being here today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I've been so looking forward to this discussion and seeing where it goes.
Awesome. Well, thanks again. I have it on my iPad here. So it's The Art of Pacing. And this is not a book that you should rush through either. I want to be very, very particular about that. I want to first get into the idea of uh, what led you, and this is such a common question. I know you're going to get this a lot as you're going through the throes of book promotion. I don't often ask this question right out of the gate, but I am very curious as to what led you to decide that you want to go down this rabbit hole of pacing and cadence and rhythm, because I think it's a very qualitative area to explore, and it can be a very nuanced a sell to like the general public in terms of readership, because we don't live in a world that rewards it, or it doesn't seem to reward it as right up front.
Right. Well, I think if I really nail it down, the genesis of this book probably goes back more than 30 years because I think I was inspired by my own past pacing failures, to tell you the truth. The way I grew up, um, the local culture that I was in, the school system that I was in, it was very much one where if people thought that you had quote unquote potential, you were expected to be perfect. And the more you did, the better. Like the more you put in up to 110% and beyond, it seemed like the more rewarded you got, the more praise you got, the more worthwhile you were made to feel within that community.
Hmm.
And I honestly, when I look back at that time, I had so many teachers who encouraged me academically, who said, you should go on to be a writer. And all of that was incredibly meaningful to me. But I also can't remember a single time when anyone really advised me to slow down and think about what do you wanna take on and what do you maybe wanna leave to the side. Like, I just don't ever remember having those kinds of discussions. The whole idea of pacing yourself was pretty much alien to me, and if I had thought of the word at all, I only would have thought of it in a context of athletics, or I wouldn't have seen it as relevant to my life.
Right,
And
right.
I and I think a lot of people, at least a lot of people that I've talked to so far, can really identify with that. Like, it's just very, very common that we don't ever really learn to pace ourselves in a thoughtful way. Like, there was one executive that I was talking to, interviewing for this book. She was like, "Yeah, we don't learn how to pace ourselves. There's not a class on it, so we don't learn it." Like, that's basically it. And
No,
so
you when it comes to like you mentioned one of the parts in the books, like what was it? When the sun comes up, you'd better be running, right? Like the idea of
yeah.
the gazelle and the lion, and it's interesting that the term race and pace are only separated by one letter, and yet in a lot of cases
Mhm.
we think about race so much, like the rat race, and we're racing, and this idea of quantity, and yet
Mhm.
pacing to me feels like, and I wonder if as you were going through the research for your book, the effects of pacing on quality and
Mhm.
quantity, because I think that at least in the world of productivity, is there is the reason the racing occurs is the more you do, the more you achieve, this checking off of boxes, the quote more productive, and or by virtue of that, the more successful you'll be. Whereas with pacing, at least in my experience, I've found that with pacing, I may not get as many things done, but the quality of those things is so much greater. Is that something that you like? What did you encounter when you were looking at this in terms of the quantity and quality kind of balance?
Yeah, that is such an important point to strike on, and one of the things that led me into this book was looking at the way that top athletes sort of pace themselves throughout the course of a training week, throughout the course of a season. And it's kind of a long story, but it grew out of some writing that I was doing for the New York Times around the Tokyo Olympics. And I was talking to a mental skills, like, training coach, and the major part of her job description was she helped these athletes to absolutely be at their best at the very moment they needed to be. And one thing that really stood out to me as I was talking to her, she really stressed, like, how much withdrawal, how much rest these top athletes were getting and were giving themselves more than you would even believe. And I think I remember her telling me, like, these world level soccer players, they look like the world's greatest nappers the day before a big game. And I mean, like, in hustle culture, we kind of look at that and we're like, give it the sidelong glance and, this is world level. How can they get away with doing that? But it's very deliberate, and they have learned through time and through experience that when they don't pull back, it's actually called tapering when you pull back athletically and mentally a few days before a big match. When you don't do that, you're not gonna be at your sharpest, and you're not gonna be at your most restored at the moment when it counts the most. And so this idea that we should be going 110% all the time, not only is it super simplistic, but we're actually shooting ourselves in the foot to a great degree, I think.
Well, and I mean, let's look at, as we're recording this, Major League Baseball, right? Like, we are now in May.
Mhm.
The season
Yep.
just started last month. And yet, when you see, and this is where social media comes into play, and I know you talk about that in the book, especially when you're talking to Carl Honore, who I've chatted with on multiple occasions around the
Yep.
slow movement and stuff, fellow Canadian too, which is kind of cool. But
Yep.
the idea of uh, social media saying, like, for example, as somebody who's in Canada, the Toronto Blue Jays, they did so well last year, and out of the gate, there was injuries, and they're not doing well, and people are like, oh my God, they've got to. I'm like, it's April, everyone. The season goes all the way till September, and I mean, you do want to course correct, but there's almost like this demand of you need to get so far ahead so that way you can rest, as opposed to
Mhm.
building it in. And it sounds like from what you're talking about, especially in relation to athletics, but I think this also applies outside of that. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Is this idea of, again, this uh, we live in a world that tends to reward being far ahead, but to what end? And I think
Mhm.
that's the pursuit that's weird, right? Like, when is far enough ahead far enough ahead?
Exactly, and I think the "to what end" part of that is incredibly important. I like the writer, William Deresiewicz. I don't know if you know him, but he wrote a book called Excellent Sheep, and Excellent Sheep is basically about when you get really, really good at performing a specific thing. Like in school, it might be being a straight A student. On the field, it might be getting the highest batting average, whatever it is. But if you're not invested in that thing and you have lost sight of why you're doing it, everything you do is going to feel like you're pushing a boulder up a hill. And many people go on for years and years like that, but is that, when you're 80 years old and you look back at your life, is that what you want the substance of your life to be?
Yeah.
So I think pacing for me very much starts with purpose. I mean, just to simplify it down, when you are running a race, you gotta know where the finish line is, or at least some idea of the finish line in order to make a reasonable pacing plan. Now, in real life, sometimes the finish line changes a little bit as you get more information and, your hopes and dreams maybe shift a little bit. But if you don't have those objectives or those goals in mind and a strong sense of why you're doing something, the best productivity tactics or the best ways to chop your schedule into 48 different chunks for every 24 hours, it is not going to get you anywhere in my experience.
Tim has something he wants to chime in with here. I have a mantra for when I run marathons or ultra marathons. No amount of going faster at the start enables you to go faster at the finish. Pacing is everything. And I think,
Yeah.
yeah, it's the tortoise and the hare, right? Too. I mean, that old fable where the hare takes off and says, "Oh, I'm just going to rest here at the end because I went so fast," and the tortoise just goes at its pace, and it ends up winning because what's interesting is the lessons we take from those too, right? I mean, writing is such a powerful tool, and visual story. You bring up story in this book as well, right? The idea of restorying, and I want to get to that in a minute or two. But
Mhm.
you know, how we interpret that story of the tortoise and the hare also affects how we deal with pacing, because someone might say, well, that's because the hare took the foot off the gas, and if he didn't do that, then he
Yeah.
would have won. Whereas the lesson I take is he went too hard and ran out of gas, and therefore had to rest and couldn't regulate when the rest could end, and the tortoise was pacing himself accordingly throughout. And so I know you
Right.
talked about burnout as well in the book. So where are there some things that someone can notice and should be paying attention to, where they
Mhm.
can recognize that their pacing is off, so that they can either maybe stave off burnout before it really takes hold, because it's hard to break free of burnout. Or
Right.
if they're stuck in it, like, how can they start to look at the art of pacing and say, okay, I need to bring something in to get me started.
Right. I think one of the ways that I think about pacing is you're a lot better off when you're more proactive than when you're reactive. And this is something that was stressed to me by multiple experts as I was researching this book. Like, by the time you have gone over the cliff and fallen into burnout entirely, it could take you like months or years to recover from that. And there was one study I saw where some people never recover fully from some of the worst bouts of burnout. And so I think we just underestimate the toll that that takes on us. So anything that we can do to see that coming, see the train coming before it hits, and pull ourselves back from the edge of the track is going to benefit us a hundredfold down the line. And one of the things for me, I mean, I don't know if everybody here is as much of a fan of the Oura Ring or um, other monitoring devices like the Apple Watch, but one of the metrics that I really keep an eye on to say, am I keeping a good pace or am I really going over the top here and need to pull back a little bit, is just tracking heart rate variability or HRV. And if you haven't heard of HRV, basically it's a measure of how much does your heart rate vary between when you breathe in and when you breathe out. And the higher your variation is between breathing in and breathing out, the more relaxed and the more adaptable your nervous system is. And so if you have a device like an Oura Ring or whatever that has your HRV rating from day to day, I have like a little chart that tracks it. And so like one day, a downward trend in HRV might not be all that significant, but if I am seeing like a week of little dots that is going down the hill, I'm like, okay, I think I need to do some incremental pullback here and make sure that I do not go over the edge in terms of burnout. And that, like, I'm not a huge techie in general, but just this little ring
Mm-hmm.
is a huge, huge tool for me as far as being preemptive, pulling myself back from the edge. And there are other tactics too. If you're the kind of person who likes taking online quizzes, online tests, there are also versions of the what's called the Maslach Burnout Inventory that you can take online, and it's really good just for getting a bead on it kinda shows you, like, are you not burned out? Are you careening toward burnout? Are you already there and you need to take some more extreme measures? And I think it's about 20, 25 questions, if I remember right, and it only takes about 10 or 15 minutes to do, and just sometimes these more objective things, whether it's the HRV, whether it is the burnout inventory, those can be a little bit more motivating than just saying to yourself, "I feel like crap. It just felt like swimming through cement to get through this week." Well, here's a little more data showing that physically and mentally, in fact, it looks like I might be in need of pullback or in need of reassessment as far as my pace.
Well, and what I love about what you're sharing there is that there's empirical data that
Yeah.
helps. And then you also touch on the idea of anecdotal data that you need to work on, like like the story. I mean, because a story
Mhm.
is very qualitative, it's very obviously anecdotal. But I think the reason you get there is because, like you pointed out, you see, oh wow, my HRV is very like it's off the charts. I need to look at this. So,
Mhm.
can you talk about this idea of restoring and creating this kind of narrative arc, so to speak, that needs to be that can help you along the way when it comes to pacing? Because uh, I don't think
Yeah.
I don't think we fully understand that when we're looking at things, and I love some of the I'll say it, shots fired at productivity culture in here, because I think it's true. Like the idea of, you can work your way into flow and you can find flow in anything, or the Pomodoro yourself, or hyper schedule is what I call it, where you're scheduling every increment of time and so on and so forth.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
I just I cannot tell you how many times I have failed utterly at that. Like, one time I got one of these, like, literally 24-hour charts that breaks it down by the 15-minute increment, and you fill in, like, exactly down to the 15 minutes. How much you sleep, how much yoga you do, how much and just it always falls apart on me. It's so brittle. It is not responsive to unexpected events, and I came to believe over the course of writing this book that flexibility and, yeah, adaptability is just always at the core of successful pacing.
Yeah, and the crazy part is that it doesn't mean that you're against measuring it. You even pointed that out. But to
Right.
constantly do it, to constantly, like, there is, like you mentioned, rigid flexibility, like to find that sweet
Mhm.
spot. So the story has to play a role in this. Can you talk about this idea of restoring and its relation to pacing?
Right, so restoring, it's something I got in touch with this researcher named Ben Rogers, and his idea was that he wanted to help people get in closer touch with what gave their lives meaning and purpose by taking them through an exercise that was based on the hero's journey. If you've seen classic Hollywood films, ancient epics like Homer's Odyssey, all of these stories basically follow the idea of the hero's journey where there's a protagonist on a quest. The protagonist faces obstacles, they have allies or teachers that help them along the way. And in the end, they bring back something of meaning and significance to their community. They leave a legacy. And so the line of questioning that you go through when you do this exercise, it kind of helps you focus those questions and those story prompts on yourself. So it helps you to pin down, like, what are you really after? What obstacles have you run into in getting there? Who have been your biggest helpers along the way? Um, and in the end, what legacy do you want to leave from your, not necessarily from your work, but also from your community relationships, other aspects of your life? What is the bottom line that you want to be your legacy? And so I think it helps uncover some pretty interesting things. And the biggest one is probably like, does what you say you want most, what surfaces in this exercise, what you're really after, like, is that aligning with what you're actually doing granularly on a day-to-day basis?
Right.
And and maybe not every single thing. I mean, we all have work that we have to do that we'd rather not do. Like, we gotta do our taxes, we gotta reply to that email. But when you look at the cadence of your day and, like, the larger arc of your week or your month, is what you're getting accomplished in line with where you're trying to go? Like, where your personal hero's quest is, I guess, so to speak, if you wanna think about it in terms of the hero's journey. And so it's an alignment tool, and I think that when you have that purpose at the forefront of your mind, it also becomes a streamlining tool. It makes it easier to cut out aspects of your life that aren't in alignment of that. Like, maybe you have a volunteer role that you took on to do a favor to a friend or whatever the case may be, but it's not really what you're about anymore. You kind of feel like you grew out of it. Well, if it's not in alignment with that overall purpose, it's easier to just sort of pare that away. And I do see that streamlining, that paring away, and also attracting more things to yourself that are in alignment with that. Both of those are key to setting a pace that's gonna see you through for years or decades.
Do you find that we don't think in terms of seasons enough when it comes to our lives, like the work that we do, the play? Because as you were talking about this, and as I was going through the book, the idea of, again, part of the culture is do it now. Like you will die.
Yeah.
Like don't forget. Like, and actually, it's interesting because in the introduction you talk about, and I've got to find it here because it actually, it didn't blow me away, but it gave me a pause of the art of pacing involves venturing back to reality continually and in a myriad ways. It's essentially a stoic art, a commitment to seeing things as they are and changing course
Mhm.
when socially sanctioned tempos no longer suffice. And what struck me there was it got me thinking about Ryan's video that he did where he went after Ivanka Trump about talking about being stoic, but talking about it and doing it are very different things. And of course
Yeah.
he got flack for basically doing the same thing to a degree. But the whole point of stoic aspects of life and living is, even when people are talking about Marcus Aurelius, is he was trying to be stoic. He wasn't like it's the efforting, it's the constant effort around it. So when
Mhm.
we think in, but we have these mixed messages that we misinterpret, like, remember that you're going to die, live for today because tomorrow isn't guaranteed. So that kind of messes
Mhm.
with our pacing, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that where you can go, like, when I say bringing you back to reality, it's just kind of like checking in with yourself more often than most of us typically do. We typically are so focused on the 101 urgent things on our to-do list that we're not thinking so much about the things that are maybe more the legacy things that are in alignment. So sometimes these pauses, and they don't have to be long pauses, like, what is it I really want? And am I doing something to work toward that today? It's not like, seize the day, I have to do every single thing on my legacy list before 5 o'clock tonight. Like, no, that's just gonna burn you out. And I don't think that that is what the Stoics would have advised at all. Like, it just like being in alignment with reality and assessing yourself, assessing your own progress, and not being super judgy of yourself, but like, am I in line? Am I in line? Or some kind of mantra like that that can be a little bit of the background soundtrack of your of your life, and not to be repeating constantly, but just something that's there, something that is a refrain that kind of, if you're getting off course, kind of kindly and compassionately nudging yourself back on.
I've got to find the I want to get to collective pacing here at some point too, because I think that's there's a lot of meat on the bone there, especially because when we talk about individuals, and I know I've done this with my own work, is that it's all fine and dandy when you're on your own, but then when you're in a group or you're working in an
Mhm.
organization and it doesn't, no one's doing that, there's a problem, right? I want to talk about I've got to find it here, but there's what it is, the brief candles, right, that you mentioned in the
Mhm.
book.
Mhm.
And you just talked about like these mantras. So there was this idea that you mentioned a principle. I'm not going to spoil it all, but there was a piece of paper that they kept in their wallet. And it was like just
Mhm.
this mantra. And I actually have several of them on my desk as well. I don't keep any of them in my wallet, but I do have my wallet, which is definitely like an old man wallet for sure. It's you see, have you seen the movie The Secret Life of Walter Mitty?
No,
The
I
Ben,
haven't.
the Ben Stiller movie. Oh my goodness!
I
So
should, yeah.
so that I think you'd probably love it, based especially on your writing here. But the spoiler alert: he gets a wallet from a character, and inside the wallet has the mantra from Life magazine, because that's where he worked, is at Life magazine. And I have that
Yeah.
wallet because I really loved the phrasing in it. And so this is actually it got me thinking about this because, of course, he had this piece of paper in the wall that you mentioned here. The quote attributed to English writer William Penn, and I think more people need to hear this particular quote, so I'm going to say it. I expect to pass through life but once. If therefore there be any kindness I can show, or any good thing I can do to any fellow being, let me do it now, and not defer or neglect it, as I shall not pass this way again. And what was
Mhm.
interesting And I've heard this quote before, but what was interesting is the gentleman, Joe DeMarche, put in his own writing next to it, it goes, "This I shall endeavor to do." So it wasn't just, hey, here's the thing, it's again a lot like the Stoics. Here's what Marcus said, or here's what Aristotle or any of them said. You adding that to it is part of that. So can you talk about these brief candles? Because that was and of course I loved how it went from kindling. The language that you used was really quite well. I really enjoyed that as a writer myself. So can we
Oh,
talk
thank
about that before we dive deeper into the collective idea of pacing? So let's talk about these brief, because I think these brief candles can lead to that too.
Right. So just to define what I mean by a brief candle, it's sort of, I think of them as these white hot short moments of selfless attention to others, and they really, if you look at them, they don't really take that much time, maybe 5 minutes or less. The moment that you refer to with the principal in the book, it was, basically this principal saw this kid at the school that he was working at, and this kid was kind of poor, and he saw him, like, go into a room and grab a couple of dollars out of a teacher's purse, and so the principal comes in, opens the door of the room, the kid is basically caught red-handed, and, I mean, the kid, he saw his life, I think, flashing before his eyes. He had dreams of going to Columbia, becoming a doctor, and he's like, "I just sent all of that down the drain." And what the principal chose to do in that moment was he just looked at him and he said, I think it was 6 words, "You can do better than that." And then, he put the money back and they left, and that was the end of that encounter. But, I mean, and for a few, I think about couple 2, 3 days, the kid was still on tenterhooks. He's like, "Surely they're gonna call my parents, like, when am I gonna be kicked out of school here? When is
The
the other shoe gonna drop?"
Yeah, the other show, I
And
was just gonna say, when is
yeah,
like he's just, yeah.
right, but what it was this incredible moment of mercy that the principal had a chance to bestow on this kid, and that moment, again, probably taking the span of less than 5 minutes, meant so much to that boy who grew up to become, um, really eminent doctor, did go to Columbia, I think he was a kidney specialist, had a great career, and he ended up tracking down this principal. The principal by then was real old on his deathbed, and he was just, "Thank you for showing me mercy on that day, like, that cleared the way to the rest of my life, and I just wanted you to know that." And that is a pretty pretty dramatic example, but I think just in a more everyday sense, a lot of us can think of moments where we might have been a little bit uncertain, not sure what the next step would be, not having a whole lot of faith in ourselves, and there might have been an important mentor or just somebody unexpected in our lives had a short conversation with us that made us see things completely differently. And then 40 years from now, if you look back, it's clear that that moment did change everything and set you on a different path. And so one of my arguments in the book is that the more of these moments we can look for opportunities to create, not only does that send someone else's life into the stratosphere in amazing ways, it's also really fulfilling to look at wh where those people are going and that that was because of you.
I also wonder if it also would be wise for us to look and see if we've had those moments happen to us or for us in our lives too. Can't do that.
Exactly.
Can't do
Yeah.
that if we're moving at a breakneck pace, right? I mean, those
Right.
moments of space within time. Like, I'll give you an example. We had a gentleman, Joel Zuckerman, on who talked about letters of gratitude. We'll link to that episode in the show notes for sure. And
Yeah.
we were talking about sending letters, and he has a quest to send a letter. I think it was a letter, a letter. I can't remember how many. I think it was maybe 52 letters, but nonetheless, um, I actually, after that episode, reached out to my grade 8 teacher
Wow.
who long story short, I'd only been in the school for about 3 months because we'd moved,
Yeah.
and I had written stories, and one of the stories I wrote was written in the voice of the character, and they had a bit of an affectation to their voice, and the teacher that got it was like, this is not good, but then she was wondering, why in the world is this kid's smart? Like, I don't understand. Passed it on to another teacher. Like, holy crow, like this kid is writing at a level that he should not be writing at this grade. And so long
Yeah.
story short I got the writing award after being in the school for only 3 months. It's just, that's the story. I mean, it didn't help me with the people that had been there for a very long time. Those other kids were kind of choked. But that moment was very much a formative moment in, like, I'm good at this. I can do this. This is something that and by the way, I
Right.
left that path for a while, and I still think about it to the point where, after having that conversation, I reached out. I've not been able to, unfortunately, locate her. She
Mhm.
probably has passed on at this point, I would imagine. But that doesn't really, I think at the end of the day, that still doesn't matter. The fact that not
Right.
only did I recognize it, but I also recorded it in my journal. To me,
Yeah.
by the way, I imagine are you a journaler? Do you keep a journal of some sort?
On and off, like, I do so much writing for work that I wouldn't say I journal
Yeah.
every day, but I have basically this long serpentine Word document where whenever I feel like I have to write something down, just something that's on my mind, it gets added in, and now it's basically about book length at this point. It's just not your standard diary with
It's
yeah.
like you've taken some kind of mushroom trip and just kind of had this long,
Yeah,
long
I would
screed.
not I would not recommend anyone try to publish this. It would be
Well,
very
it would
psychedelic.
be Marcus Aurelius's meditations, right? Because it was just his
There we
journal.
go.
Have you
Yeah.
read Meditations? We actually had it as a book club selection in our community. Tim, actually, who's on we talked about it, like, this is not a book that was meant to be published necessarily. There's a lot
Yeah.
of things being said repetitively in
Mhm.
different ways
Mhm.
that he goes, I really just need to be a good person. I really, this is how I will work
Yeah.
to be a
Yeah.
better. It's just like beating the crap over himself. So I imagine that
Mhm.
screed, just like my journals, just I think most
Yeah.
are like, you'll see those patterns there. And and
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
I wonder if those patterns are some of what helps with this idea of collective pacing that you talk about. Because I know that
Mhm.
when I've worked with organizations, individuals in organizations, and this has happened where somebody has been exposed to the work I do, and then they bring me into their organization to help, and because they had success with it, it helps with the group, especially depending on their role
Mhm.
within the group. So, can we talk about collective pacing? Because I'm sure that people who are listening, watching, whatever, are like, that's fine for me on my own, but how in the
Right.
world am I actually going to be able to do this inside of an environment that doesn't necessarily not only reward pacing, but even acknowledge it?
Right. And it's very difficult. I think one reason there aren't all that many consultants who do collective pacing is because there are so many sides to it, there are so many levels to it. But while I was writing the book, I was able to see some examples of sort of collective pacing laboratories, so to speak. And one of them was at Brown University with their surgical residents. Now, surgical residents, you may be aware, they typically work about 80 hours a week. So, just from a pure time spent point of view, it is just going to be grueling no matter how you slice it, right? But what they're doing, they've brought in a consultant named Daryl Appleton, and she really does think about things in terms of team pacing. And so she does a lot of dialogues within teams of residents and about encouraging them to share some of the pacing challenges that they're having and also to deepen the trust between them so that if somebody is really, really feeling overloaded and close to the edge, instead of feeling like everybody else is gonna jump down their throat if they say that they have a concern and that they're feeling overloaded, um, that support has been modeled before, like, those practices have been tried and tested within these groups, and so over time and over repetition, it does become more of a group norm. I don't wanna say it's a perfect norm, in any group of surgical residents or other people who many of whom are more type A, go, go, go type of personalities, there's gonna be conflict, but I do think there's power in when the people who are in charge of a program say, "We are going to prioritize healthy group pacing, and as members of the group, we are going to support each other in making sure that each of us are setting a sustainable pace." That is powerful, and I think people in these manager roles, in these boss roles, might not realize how much power that they have even within their own teams. It could just be a small team, 4 or 5 or 6 people. If you are modeling that and encouraging other people to ask for support when they need it, um, it is gonna become a group norm, and sometimes there are some settings where it can even make sense to have, like, pacing check-ins every week, every couple of weeks, and it doesn't have to take long at all. It could be as little as 5 or 10 minutes, like, how is everybody feeling? Is anyone feeling overloaded? What can we do to help? Like, how can we work together to make sure we're all kinda crossing the finish line and not feeling like we're sucking wind? So, that being the idea, but just a few minutes of that goes a long way toward making a team that functions well and having employees that wanna stay, I think, within that team, and that all even thinking in terms of, profits and productivity, it benefits the business, and sometimes businesses have to be patient enough to see that result, but I
Well,
think in the long run, it is beneficial.
and it's an ongoing practice too. It's not a one and
Yeah,
done, right? I think that's the other thing too.
absolutely.
And
Yeah,
and that those expectations have to be on both sides of the equation, individually and in a group situation. Before we wrap up,
right.
I just want to ask. Obviously, we're going to get people to pick up the book. We've touched on a lot of things, but what's one thing that someone could do after leaving this conversation today that they could do to start to embrace the art of pacing just a little bit more?
That's a great question. I think part of pacing is about incremental pullback, which we're not always so good at doing. We tend to see pacing as like an on-off switch type of thing. Like either we're in 100% or we're quiet footing or we're lying flat or we're doing these kind of withdrawal things. But most things are more in between, and there's sort of this healthy middle zone of the pacing spectrum. So if you want to experiment with moving toward that middle zone, maybe think of a commitment that you have in your life that you've been a little bit uneasy about, not quite sure where you should go with it. Maybe it's a volunteer commitment. Maybe it's a commitment to a relative, like I'm going to visit you once a month, no matter what. Um, and think about, well, do I want to dial that back? Do I want to dial that up? And to what degree? Because I think, with like a volunteer commitment, it's more like, okay, I better just quit because I can't do this anymore. But maybe instead you volunteer for half or 2/3 of the hours and try that out, and then see how that goes, see how that is impacting on your stress level and just your level of energy that you have, and based on that assessment, you can make another adjustment, and so I think of it as like this process of iteration. Scientists love to do the guess and check thing, and you can do that in your own life as you incrementally dial back in whatever area is calling to you to be dialed back. That is a great way to give it a try.
The book is called The Art of Pacing, a guide to balancing short-term demands with long-term thriving. Elizabeth, now as we're recording this, the book is available for pre-order, right? Because it's not quite out yet.
That's
But
right.
so where can people go to get the book and learn more about you and your work?
Well, they can go to my website, elizabethsvoboda.com. Are you gonna have that in the show notes, or should I
Yep.
spell it out? Okay.
No, we'll get it in the
Um,
show notes for sure. We'll also make sure it's in. I think it's already in the description here of the YouTube video, so we'll be good to go there.
okay,
Yep.
that's great. And just for pre-order, your favorite bookseller, indie booksellers are great. Bookshop.org. You can look up your favorite indie book retailer and just type in The Art of Pacing, and it should pop up on pretty much any retailer you prefer.
Well, Elizabeth, thanks so much for having a productive conversation with me today.
Thank you so much, Mike. This was a blast.